I'm starting a new project which I've announced on Instagram, so some of you may already know it a bit. This is a Magic Factory M2A4 Bradley. If I had to describe this set in one word, I would say awesome. You can find the entire review on my channel and the link to this video is in the description. Initially I was wondering what to show in the construction part, because the model was so easy to build that it would be extremely boring to show the plastic assembly. Let's say that here is a very abbreviated report on the work on the model, in which I will only point out the work that I consider worth mentioning. First, I masked the periscopes with masking tape. It may not be a sophisticated operation, but if we had transparent parts, it's worth using this advantage. And there are quite a lot of them in this model, because in addition to the periscopes there are also armored glass shields on the turret. The second thing is the towing cable. Here, if you know my work, it's probably not a surprise. I replaced the plastic element with a product from Eureka XXL. Of course you have to cut off the rope fasteners, but it's not a complicated operation. Metal rope with resin ends looks much better, and this is out of discussion. Attaching the panels to the entire model is like building with Lego bricks. Everything fits perfectly and it's only a matter of time how quickly we'll get it done. Note photo-etched elements. The ventilation meshes fit perfectly and their weave is very delicate. Lovely! After 4 days of work I have a ready model. If you would like to ask whether it's worth replacing any element in it, I can say that you can consider the tracks and barrel of the Bushmaster cannon. But in my opinion there is no such necessity. However, if so, you could also consider changing the antenna sockets. And this is how the Bradley presents. We can say it's a beautiful piece of plastic. Okay, what do we have here? I decided to add 2 crew members. I chose a set from Mini Art and additionally resin heads from Alpine. The first figure in the green jacket is unchanged, but the second one has a different hand that better suits the position he has standing in the hatch. Additionally, a few wires for the headphone cables, and we have a crew ready to paint. Some of the elements were attached to the photos and general presentation with several pieces of blue tack. These are elements that are planned to be in Kark colors, so it will be much more convenient to paint them separately. Attaching them to wooden sticks will facilitate work and manipulation while painting. On the other hand, painting NATO camo will be also easier. I glued a nut inside of the hull. Of course it's supposed to be a handle that will be helpful during painting and weathering. As you can see, this proven method is effective and fulfills its purpose 100%. Classical cleaning of the entire model with model degreaser gives me confidence that the paint will adhere well to the surface. And I save time because this product evaporates within a few seconds. I covered the metal elements with a layer of primer specially created for this purpose. It's worth paying attention not to clog the holes in the mesh on the engine with excessive amount of product. That's why I apply small amounts and wipe these elements with a brush. Typically, the first stage of painting is the preparation of rubber rims. Dark grey paint is best for this. When the tracks are glued, the inner wheels are already glued, so we have to put in some effort to paint the wheels, even just a little. In this case I don't worry about the accuracy, because after weathering the blur is almost invisible. Of course it's best if the wheels are separate, but in this case it wasn't a good solution. First, the sandy shade for additional armor. For this I used paint from the modern US AVF colors set from AK Interactive. New packaging and, to be more precise, new plastic paint containers, but the paint itself is a proven quality that we have known for a long time. Please note that the model has not been covered with any primer. The job done by model degreaser is sufficient. I decided to prepare 3 sand color wheels to increase the contrast, of course. The set includes a single stencil for painting wheels, which is worth using. The base color is not a green. There is no great philosophy here. You need to copy the camo pattern provided by the producer or use available materials found on the internet. To tell the truth, they are slightly different, but it's not a big surprise to me. There is probably a factory painting scheme, I'm sure of that, but unfortunately I haven't found it. But I found it correct in this moment to mention my wonderful patrons who support my activity. Massive thanks, guys! The people who helped me the most are Bulldog09, Christopher Obarski, Dale Etchison, Dan Dibuwa, Dan Mikeshak, EMT364, Eric Kirwan, Hans Zub, Peter L, Steve Enkin and the awesome Karsten Keddy. But the people listed just now are also my great patrons. Please don't forget that you can be one of them. And I realize it's not easy these days, but if you have a few bucks you could drop in my cup, that would be great. Thanks! Oh, and one more thing. Remember that if you join for free you probably won't be able to view my work. Better try the 7 days free trial, which will give you many more possibilities. When all the camo blocks were painted, I glued all the sand painted elements. No problem, just a little glue. I started painting the details with the towing cable and shackles at the front and rear of the vehicle. If you want to see how I paint towing cables in different variants, check the link in the video description. Using the diluted paint I made a few scratches along the way just for fun. I slightly darkened the metal net over the engine. I painted diluted smoke black and in order not to cover the holes in the mesh, I blew it with airbrush every few moments. I painted the small elements with a lighter shade of green. To paint the trucks I made a mixture of 3 colors: gunmetal, natural silver and pale grey. Thanks to this it was not very metallic but retained a delicate silver shine. I know that for many of you this color of painting trucks is almost like blasphemy, but the truth is that they get this color if they work in the field just a bit. And this is the vehicle I'm building. Not a museum exhibit that stands outdoors for years, but a machine that covers the terrain every day, causing the trucks to work and wrap in every place. If you have any doubts, look at the photos from the war in Ukraine, where you can see the trucks of machines serving on the front. The only dark brown you will find there is mud. And what is interesting, there is no rust, only beautiful polished truck links. So before you apply any color again, think carefully. I painted the rubber pads with rubber black from Real Color. Painting tools is a topic that often causes some controversy. Of course, I know that in real vehicles these elements are often camo colored, but due to the increased attractiveness of the model's appearance I cannot convince myself to use such a solution. Maybe it's also because I'm used to this kind of painting, which has been repeated on each model for many years. Now it's done almost mechanically and I always remind myself to try to do it more realistically when it's all over. Another controversial effect is highlighting of the details. On the camo colors I use grey for black, cork for brown and medium olive for green. Visually I really like this effect, even though it's 100% not real. The only realistic option would be to paint it silver to give the effect of the paint being wiped off by the soldiers. But it was a walk in the park, in contrast to painting dots on sand, which was a disaster for my eyes. For this I used pale sand. I don't even want to count how many heads are there, enough to make me feel tired, but it was worth it. To glue the headlight lenses I used Crystal Magic glue from AK Interactive. Thanks to the applicator you can apply the glue precisely and additionally have plenty of time to properly arrange the glasses, which in my case turned out to be very useful. It wasn't fun having to fiddle with positioning the glass when I had recording on. Already at this stage I glued in the antennas made of 0.2mm plastic profile. These antennas look a bit thinner in the photos, but using wire was out of the question. Smoke black was used again. I painted the blinkers and brake lights with transparent paints from AK. The set of stickers is not impressive because these few inscriptions will be completely invisible on the model. Well, they are for use, so you have to use them. Before I start working with them, a thin layer of shiny varnish from Modeler's World appeared on the entire model. This will facilitate the application of transfer as well as the subsequent application of washes. These large uniform surfaces are very tempting to add some unique markings to them. I was thinking about adding some extra decals because I have a set with the Transformers logo in my collection. Maybe it would look cool, but on the other hand I didn't want to overdo it. From what can be seen in the photos, US Army vehicles even during warfare are not as dirty as the equipment of other armies. I will save it for another model. All decals were soaked in a special liquid which finally set them on the paint surface. Now just apply a thin layer of glossy varnish and the job is done. I'm starting the weathering. Of course, what else can you start with than wash, but this time I made it using two different colors because the model is painted in two different camouflages. I prepared deep black for the dark NATO camo and light brown for the sandy one. Of course I could have used black for both colors, but I checked it and it didn't look good. The contrast was too vivid. I can't believe I'm saying this, but it actually happened and I didn't like it at all. That's why I choose light brown, and it was a great solution because in addition to the wash I also discolored individual blocks of additional armor. It looks nice and in my opinion definitely better than the green elements. I haven't seen such a color messy in any of Bradley's photos, so I decided there was no point in exaggerating. A color within the sand range is sufficient. Doing a wash on light camo is more demanding, you just see more of it. Such a trivial statement, but there is no denying that dark camo is more forgiving. In this case the most important thing is to highlight all the heads that I brightened one by one, devastating my eyesight, which is no longer sharp, and glasses become an indispensable element of my work. The discolorations I mentioned can be painted as with regular paint. Just a little bit of the product and you have interesting color differences. Just like here. While working on the Brad system panels I was wondering whether to use oil paints in my later work. I thought this would happen, but in the end I didn't. But why? In my opinion using a wash was enough to change the shade. I decided to paint some scratches, although I know that most of them will disappear under the dust and dirt that I plan to use on this model. Well, so that no one will say that I don't do it, some silver scratches will be best visible on dark camouflage. On sand I will focus on other effects. I won't get into philosophy here, but I simply had to matte the shiny varnish left after the coat under the decals and wash. One layer was enough to achieve the desired effect. I remembered that I hadn't removed the masks from periscopes and armor windows, so now was the time to do it. It was even better because matte varnish would not be recommended, although in a moment I will stain the glasses a bit with earthy grime wash. This is the perfect solution for subduing shiny surfaces and giving them a dirty look. At the moment it may be a little too dirty, but in the result I'm sure it will be okay. I am not worried about it. Oh, and I know that the glass should have a special shade, but unfortunately I don't have anything to do it with, so they stay as they are. Now I'm starting the main part of the weathering. This will be a long process, but first I would like you to know what my starting point is. This photo is my inspiration. I don't want to copy the effects, but I try to reflect the general appearance of the vehicle so that it's similar to what can be seen in the photo. For the main dusting I will use 3 products. The first one is weathering paint dried standard light matte. I apply it mainly as a base for pigments and pigment washes. The delicate layer is very subtle but also clearly visible on dark NATO camo. I apply significantly more product on the sides of the hull than on the upper surfaces. Initially I applied the paint when the turret and hull were separate, but now to more precisely check the places where dust can accumulate and not be wiped off by the crew and other factors, I set the turret in the standard position and made the dust in nooks and crannies. And after the entire initial dusting process I wiped the armor glasses once again. The second product is urban dust pigment. Now I'm making a mixture with weathering paint and I will use it to apply dried matte splatter to the model. With a thick mixture, speckled molecules are really easy to make, but it's best to test them first on a material other than the model. Generally, in a moment there will be a lot more matte on the chassis, but these particles won't play a major role. Using a white brush I began to apply long streaks of matte all over the hull. I'm not covering this part completely. In addition to the mixture of pigment and weathering paint, I also use dry pigment and apply it to create the appropriate texture. The third product I use is oil paint thinner, which I use to fix my work with pigments. Of course, I didn't forget about sides of the hull, which, even though they are hidden behind the wheels and under covers, require proper treatment. Due to the very limited space, I applied the pigment as much as possible and fixed it all with thinner. This is enough to make an imitation of dried matte. Generally, I don't like this type of combination, and it would definitely be better and easier to apply matte if these elements were dismantled. But it's what it is and you have to deal with it. I also didn't forget to get the wheels dirty on the inside. I applied the mixture of thinner and pigment to them, which created a pigment wash. Generally I forgot to film how I was preparing the wheels, but it's not a big feat. Just apply the pigment and fix it with the fixer. The most important thing is to remember about the different amount of pigment and any special effects such as oil spills, darker spots or scratches. I started dirting the side covers with the previously used pigment wash. Here you also need to remember about diversity and building contrast. Dirting all panels with the same intensity will be boring. It's worth adding more dry matte in some places. And it's best to work with an accelerator, which will definitely speed up the work on pigments. Here you can clearly see the differences in the intensity of the dry matte. Additional stains made of pigment introduce streaking elements throughout the surface. The panel with very little dirt breaks the whole of this segment with its dark appearance. Just like on the bottom of the vehicle, here I also apply small splashes of dried matte. I added more pigment to the edges of side skirts just to make them unified with the rest of the surfaces. In some places there are lumps of mud which I try to fix with the thinner. I also added large amounts of pigment in places where mud tends to accumulate in larger amounts. Of course I still work with thinner as a fixer. I paint the entire trucks with a pigment wash, paying particular attention to ensuring that it reaches the recesses on the trucks as much as possible. I'm also starting to stain the sand side panels. I do this in several attempts so as not to overdo it with excess dust, just like you see in the video. I wiped off the excess with my sweaty finger. Fortunately, it works effectively enough. I also start working with dry pigment, applying it to the back parts of the panels. And of course, to maintain the right balance, I also dirtied the front panels. I have already thoroughly covered the tracks with pigment wash and now I need to repaint the rubber pads. Eventually I will slightly dirty them again, but this will be done later. Due to the fact that the rear doors of the soldier's compartment opens while operating on the ground, I decided to dirty this edge with more mud that may accumulate there. I still use the same products. As I continued working with the pigments, I started to build contrast between individual elements of the vehicle. It's easiest to achieve a satisfactory effect by emphasizing recesses and nooks, as well as hatches and all covers, because in most cases they constitute a convex part of the structure. You can clearly see it here with the troops compartment cover. At first glance it seems very exaggerated and inconsistent with reality, but the truth is that we have to act a little differently in many elements of the model and adapt the appearance of the model to our needs. Then the final effect will be pleasing to the eye. Contrast is one of the methods. Pigments also allow to create a dust effect, so it's 2 in 1. While the pigment is light, mixing it with oil thinner and creating mud gives a completely different effect. The most important thing is to remember to be moderate and not to overdo it, because it's very difficult to remove excess from the surface of the model. It can be said that this is only possible to a certain extent, because it's impossible to completely remove the pigment and restore the initial condition. Building dirt on the model requires constant checking of the overall appearance of the model. It's very easy to forget and have a nice time getting dirty. After an hour it turns out that we have a huge lump of pigment and the level of frustration reaches the maximum. Therefore, from time to time, step away from the model, drink some coffee and look at it from a greater distance. If you feel that you may soon reach a critical point, it means that the model no longer needs it. Simple and effective. The dried mud on the vehicle is rather boring, but I decided to enrich it with some wet spots. For this I used engine oil spill wet effect, a bit near the edges simulating oil leaks that have soaked into the structure of the mud. Looks nice. I used the same effect on the wheels by making oil leaks from the axles. I also decided to change their appearance a bit. There is enough mud, so I wiped the insides of the road wheels. The effect is sufficient and satisfactory. Dirty water is a perfect effect to create dried spill stains. I focused on the areas around the hatches where the possibility of spilling liquids by crew members is much bigger. But other places are also worth attention to add some confusion to their appearance. It's worth remembering that such spots have quite even edges. This effect is best visible on the surface covered with pigment. A handful of additions are, in my opinion, necessary to add more realism, and they don't have to be fancy sets with super duper elements. I chose several parts from various Eureka XXL, a piece of previously colored paper for tarps, and a set of ammunition and chain. In addition to what I have just shown, and this appeared during the composing the set of additions, I would like to draw attention to the barbed wire that I decided to add to the model. I used an old product from Edwards. This is enough to create a good looking scroll and attach it to the model. The photo etched plate is designed in such a way that apart from the first cut with a knife or scissors, the entire length of the wire can be torn off with your fingers. A thick, good looking roll is about half of the contents of the tin. Maybe even a little less, but you have to check it according to your own needs. I want it on a plastic tube of paint because the diameter is perfect to fit on the model. After removing it from the tube, I taped it in 2 places with a piece of painter's tape. To attach the coil to the base, I used 0.2mm soldering wire, which I supposed to imitate a string, so I painted it a faded green color. As a result, it looks great and the flat area at the front of the model is properly filled. I made the exhaust and its surroundings dirty with black pigment and removed the excess with a small vacuum cleaner. I had some trouble with the empty shells and ammunition belt connectors. Initially I wanted to arrange both elements on the model, but I started analyzing videos of Bradley shooting to be sure about both elements. While you can clearly see the falling shells, by the way, the producer forgot to make a flap covering the hole that leads the shells outside, and I will have to make it later. The connectors are completely invisible. I talked to several colleagues, but opinions are divided. So just to be sure, I will glue only the shells for now. I used solution fluid to keep them in place. It's enough and, what is very important, invisible after drying. And the same was used to glue the chain. This time I didn't hang it on any shackle, but only placed it freely in a place from which it couldn't fall. At the end of this stage I prepared imitation of oranges. I used mustard seeds and painted them in appropriate color. A bit of solution fluid will keep them in place without any problems. For the end I covered the visible parts of the tracks with pigment. I'm going to place the model on asphalt surface, so they shouldn't be dirty but only dusted. Back to the empty shells. With this information and color scheme I couldn't leave them in their original color. The mixture of German field grey and natural grey gave the perfect shade, which I quickly painted the already arranged pieces. After gently rubbing with metallic pigment, the effect is perfect. I added 3D printed rings from ammunition belt, which are a perfect complement to the previously arranged shells. These small elements are great, and I'm glad that thanks to the help of viewers I managed to determine where they should be. Contrary to appearances, in the films of shooting Bradley you can't see exactly or at all where these connectors fall out. But now I'm sure that they are where they should be. Finally, a few pencil rubbings and I consider this topic closed. One of the last touches on the model was a little rust on the gun barrel, which I paint with weathering paints using the wet on wet method. After drying I have a great color scheme that perfectly reflects the wear of this element, exactly as on real vehicles. Oh, and I forgot about the figures. I added a crew from Mini Art with resin heads from Alpine. This completely changes the look of the model and the human factor does the job. Besides, a model always looks better with figures, right? This is the final result. This presentation is missing figures, but also the base that I built for this model. If you are interested, find the series with this project on my channel and there you will be able to watch the missing episode. For more information and pictures, please visit my Patreon, which I mentioned earlier in the video. And a short note for collectors: all my models are for sale. Get in touch with me and we'll discuss what you need or just ask what I have for sale. This one presented here is also for sale and I will be happy if it becomes part of some collection. In the next episode I'm going to show you some really unique projects. So that you don't miss anything, stay tuned. That's all for today, see you next time, cheers!